Is there a war on men? Something to think about. Is there a war on men? Now, this is a sort of concept that I've seen floating around for a while on cyberspace, and it's inevitably a response to feminism in the West. War is always a loaded term because it insinuates a lot of different things. Obviously, there's traditional war in the sense of two armies clashing with one another, but war in the modern sense has also been taken to mean sort of media onslaught, so to speak. There's a long-standing feminist argument, especially in the United States, about the war on women. You always hear feminists talk about the GOP war on women. I'm not a Republican, but I'm not convinced that is accurate, because there's a lot of women in the Republican Party, like some Michelle Bachmann and Sarah Palin and so on. I'm not supporters of theirs, but I think it contradicts the view that the Republicans are anti-woman. Both the Republican and Democratic parties are huge political parties. I believe they're the world's largest political parties outside the Chinese Communist Party, so that's just one point. They can't be sort of generalised in a certain way because there's lots of schools of thought within them. But back to this point about whether or not there is a war on men. I think if you were to look at the level of negativity coming from feminists, and I've made a video about this before, in that sense, it's hard not to believe that there is definitely a lot of hostility towards men from feminists, and feminists do have a huge amount of influence on the media, and on public debate and policy making and so on. They will say that they don't, but it's very, very common that you will see some outrage or some headline at least once a week, at least, in the British and American press about how us awful men are objectifying women, or about how terrible things are for women, how unequal things are, etc. I talk about this objectification thing because I think that's the most recent feminist code word for launching an attack on men. I've made a video specifically about this whole objectification debate, but I believe it's an important subject, so we'll weigh in a bit more in this video. I believe, you see, on the surface, feminists say they're uncomfortable with the way women are under pressure to look a certain way, and they argue that women's bodies are being sexualized by the media. But I believe the real issue here is that it's yet another example of feminists trying to criminalize the male mind. In other words, what they're actually doing is vilifying us for daring to think as a heterosexual man, to think about sexuality. Honestly, the way feminists go on, you would think that they would want to criminalize men even thinking about sex. Now, I'm not trivializing real problems in society. Rape does exist. It's an appalling crime. Sexual assaults do happen, and there is unfortunately still examples of misogyny, actual misogyny. Those problems do exist, as does sexual harassment. But I'm uncomfortable with this whole objectification debate because I believe it's bordering on a sort of criminalization of sexuality. And what bothers me about it is, in the vast majority of cases, it's women who themselves are exposing their own bodies, for want of a better term. So it could be in a pop video, it could be in some context of advertising, even though male sexuality is often used in that as well. I saw a Dolce & Gabbana ad recently, and it showed a very sexy looking couple. Couple, that's the key word. It showed a beautiful woman with rather large breasts, low cut top, but it was done in a very sensual way. It wasn't slutty, it wasn't, in my opinion, it wasn't cheap. It was done in a sensual sort of manner. Yes, she looked seductive, she looked sexy. But the man was clearly a model as well. He had a strong torso, he was well built, and he was embracing her. This was clearly a 50-50 scenario. But it's the sort of thing that feminists will only focus on. Oh, look at how this woman's being objectified. I honestly wonder what feminists want exactly. Do they want sexually attractive women to wear a cloth? You know, someone made a point recently, I can't remember who it was, I think it was just on a comment thread, but I think they made a good point that it's entirely natural, and it's always been the case, that people have always sexually objectified those they are attracted to. Whether that be heterosexual men objectifying women, heterosexual women objectifying men, gay men objectifying other men, lesbian women objectifying other women. This is a very loaded term, objectification, because it implies, you know, the common thing is, oh, you treat them like a piece of meat. I assure you, when heterosexual men see a sexually alluring woman, they do not see a piece of meat. A piece of meat, I've made this point before, a piece of meat is a very ugly thing. It's bloody, it looks very ugly. So I'm not really sure where that analogy comes from. But it's quite clear that there's enormous appeal for sexuality, which I'm pleased to say in some ways overshadows feminist attempts to make men feel guilty. Take, for example, the Psy videos, the South Korean rapper. Those videos are immensely popular, and I assume it isn't just men that like his videos. I assume a lot of girls find his videos entertaining as well. They've been viewed, both of them, Gangnam Style and Gentleman, roughly 2 billion times between them. Now those videos clearly show a lot of references to sexuality. They show a lot of sexy girls dancing around him, so on. Yet they're hugely popular, and I don't see them causing any real harm. Clearly the girls in them are participating in the videos. The point I'm making is, as a man, it gets incredibly nauseating to constantly have to see this feminist critique, and have our very existence as men, basically we're made to feel guilty about being men. You know, I saw a funny Family Guy clip. If you just type it in, it's called "Men, We Don't Know What We Did." Obviously it's an exaggeration, Family Guy is a comedy, but it's not actually far off what feminism makes men, what reduces men to. Men are made to feel guilty at times for absolutely nothing. I remember I wasn't going to make a video about this, but it is relevant. I'll just include it in this. The feminist columnist Yasmin Alibhai-Brown, she writes for The Independent. Sometimes she comes out with things I think are reasonable. I agree with some of her views on things. But this piece that she came out with was just so ridiculous, and I'm pleased to see a lot of women criticised it as well. Basically it was a piece on high heels, the wearing of high heels. And she tried to argue that it's just another excuse for sexual predators to prey on women, ignoring the fact that no one is forcing women to wear high heels. I cannot think of any business, any company that forces women to wear high heels, and certainly no men that would force their girlfriends or wives to do so. And by the way, if he does, forget him, he's not a good partner. But I think most rational people can see that it's women themselves that make the choice to wear high heels, and a lot of women don't. I've had female friends who have told me that they don't wear them because they're uncomfortable. Other women choose to wear them because they see them as fashionable. But the point is, it's a choice factor. So of course Yasmin Alibhai-Brown, being a feminist, finds this as yet another reason to attack men. The wearing of high heels, a woman's choice. And this is the sort of thing that men get really sick of. And I did respond to that article, and I pointed out that it's just the stupidity of it. I honestly believe that Western feminists find reasons to complain. They go out of the way to find reasons to try and make men feel guilty. Because, as is well known, we're all dangerous rapists in our mind. You know, being a heterosexual man these days is almost a crime in itself, if you go along with feminist thinking. Because a man cannot do anything in terms of sexuality without being made to feel guilty. If I put up a poster of a sexy girl in my room, then I'm a pervert. So admiring female beauty, admiring female sexuality, even if the woman in question is flaunting it, that's my fault, because I'm a perverted male. No, apparently it's much more attractive. What I should be attracted to is an academic feminist talking about powerful women. No, that's attractive. Cleavage, beautiful back, lovely legs. I shouldn't be attracted to those things, because that makes me a pervert if I am. You see, what bugs me about this is denying that is denying biological reality. Heterosexual people are attracted to the opposite sex, and that is nothing to feel guilty about. Well, no form of sexuality is anything to feel guilty about. Homosexual attraction is nothing to feel guilty about. The point I'm making is feminists want men to feel guilt. They want to actually criminalise the male mind. That is what this whole debate about objectification is really about. Because it's like, someone made a good point. It's like, why should an entire industry have to change because of the whims of a relatively small number of people? Because really, most women don't care that much. I just don't think an entire industry should have to change because feminists, in their opinion, claim it's sexist, and they claim it objectifies women. Objectify means reducing someone to an object. But sexuality is part of the human being, and it's not something that should be repressed. Because actually, that sort of ideology is not far off what the Taliban propose. Now, feminists may not be like the Taliban, where they want to stone people to death, but their repression of sexuality is not that different. And the thing about feminists is, if men are perceived to enjoy sexuality in any sense, then that must be perverted. That must be male control. If feminists had their way, men would be forbidden from enjoying sexuality at all. I honestly believe that. What they want is a situation, they talk about female empowerment, but they're distorting what that actually means. Because female empowerment already exists, in the sense that women are making the choices to do these things. That's a key factor that feminists ignore. So for example, if you have round card girls at a boxing match, feminists will jump on and they will say, oh, look at these poor girls, they're being objectified. But these poor girls are being paid a lot of money to go between rounds for a few seconds. It's 30 seconds between boxing rounds, and there's only, depending how long the fight lasts, could be 6 rounds, 7 rounds. Compare that job to what the male boxers have to do. I think you'll see which job is harder. And what's the worst they're going to put up with? A few wolf whistles. That is it. They wouldn't face sexual harassment, because any fan in the crowd who, for example, touched them or something would be thrown out by the security, and rightly so. But it's an example, I quote that because it's the sort of thing where feminists would talk about objectification, and they just cannot see that it's free choice. And it ultimately comes down to criminalising the heterosexual male mind. I think that's very sad.